implemented their first tax policy in 2019. And according to the report of Forbes, it is being recorded that the greenhouse gas emission of Canada has reduced by 8%. Secondly, limit the scope of coverage. According to the United Nations, it is being reported that the largest fossil fuels are the largest towards global climate change. For example, of fossil fuels, they are coals, oil and gas. They account of over 70% of greenhouse gas emission and over 90% of carbon dioxide emissions. However, if Nigeria can try as much as possible to limit the scope to the downstream sectors that produce larger emission, this will be like setting policies that will capture the sources of emission in Nigeria. The next slide, please. Implementing should vary at different jurisdictions. Nigeria should try as much as possible to set different carbon tax policies for various states. For example, comparing Lagos State and Osun State. Lagos State is a state known that has a high concentration of heavy industry. Due to the fact of this heavy concentration, there must be a large footprint of carbon. There must be a large footprint of carbon policies. And a state like Osun State should have a low carbon footprint due to the fact that you avoid or minimize the disruption of the economy. Please back. To my last point, the government should incentivize companies, enterprise that makes use of renewable energy such as solar, wind by offering tax breaks, tax cuts, and tax credit to such companies. Nigerian or FRSC, all the stakeholders that are in charge of policy to try as much as possible to allocate tax cuts, tax breaks for companies that have already transited to renewable energy. This will encourage other companies who are still in fossil fuel to transit from fossil fuel system to renewable energy. In conclusion, last night I had a dream. I had a dream that someday in the future, Nigerian transit from fossil fuel system to renewable energy. I had a dream. I had a dream that there were no more climate concerns as the greenhouse gas emission was drastically reduced. I had a dream. I saw a better Nigeria. I saw a future that is free from global warming. If the human rights activist Martin Luther King is here today, this will be one of the major themes of his presentations. However, let me leave you with the words of Alex Edmonds, which says, for individual, company, and government, making IP is good, but the failure to achieve social values is what is bad. This is to encourage everyone that beyond government, we have our own contributions towards the environmental sustainability in Nigeria. Thank you so much.
A big round of applause for Team A. Now we're going to have questions for the judges. Judges, you have the opportunity to ask them questions. Please remain on the stage. Any questions from the judges, please? Do we have any questions? Hold on. There's a question.
Thank you, Tim. Hey. Well, while listening to your presentation, I think I have two questions. And the first one is this. You talked about introduction of carbon tax on organizations or industries involved in pollution. And at the same time, of course, now incentivizing businesses who have adopted renewable energy. My question is this. Now, if you are focusing on introduction or imposition of carbon tax on just companies or organizations who are engaged or involved in pollution, what happens to other organizations? Because by the time we are looking at incentivizing, both organizations who are involved in pollution and the other ones not involved in pollution are likely to benefit tax incentive in as much as they have invested or they are considering to invest in renewable energy. Thank you. I don't know if you got my question.
for...
The number two is this. What should be the role, because I also listened to you and I didn't hear anything about the role of the legislature. So what should be the role of the legislature in tax environmental policies?
Thank you so much for the question. So on the first aspect, what we believe is that carbon taxes are a punitive measure to ensure that companies comply with the amount with environmental sustainability plans of the government. So we believe that the carbon taxes should be set on companies that actually emit fossil fuels. They are not all companies. So when we talk about carbon taxes, it's not a kind of tax like we have with the company income tax and all of that, but taxes on companies that actually burn fossil fuels. So that's our point, and that's our stand on that. And then secondly, I don't know, the second question you asked about. Yeah, before that. Okay. So the second one, the role of the... So we feel that the role of the legislature is to pass laws and actually, in collaboration with the executive, then pass laws and have laws in place for all these things. And then, so that's why we mentioned that in 2021, the president signed into law the Climate Change Act. So we believe that the legislature, to some extent, has actually played its role there. So what we need now is implementation of these laws that we have. And that's what many of our panelists have mentioned, that implementation is one of the problems that we're having with Nigeria. So we need implementation and not a lack of laws, essentially.
A round of applause for Team C. Timekeeper, are you ready? On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Adam Bayam Onokwemiko, and my colleague Elizabeth Uche Priest. In the next few minutes, we will be presenting a blueprint for leveraging tax policies and ESG standards for environmental sustainability in Nigeria. Sometime back, I was in a seminar for climate change, and guest speaker mentioned that a friend of his was bragging about getting a contract from a major company to drill 3 boreholes in one of their branches. Then, at first, it seemed like a good thing, but then he thought about it. If the rate at which we were drilling boreholes in this country continues, then in the nearest future, Nigeria will be prone to frequent tremors and earthquakes. Please, next slide. And he told his friend, okay, this is my concern. The friend said, he dismissed it and said, it is none of his problem. It is a problem for the future. And that is where our problem is. Environmental sustainability is a problem for now and not a problem for the future. As can be seen, in Nigeria, we are currently facing various environmental challenges. Lagos, for example, the rate at which flooding is in Lagos, it is alarming. Lokoja, desertation in the north, over-reliance on fossil fuels. It's becoming too much, and it is high time we understood that environmental sustainability is not a problem for the future. I'll be handing over to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Maria. Next slide, please. The next one after this. Thank you very much. Nigeria as a country is a signatory to several international treaties, and we have some of them here: the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement. These particular treaties are focused specifically on climate change and environmental sustainability. In addition, Nigeria is among the countries that has pledged its support to the attainment of the SDGs, that is the Sustainable Developmental Goals. Of interest are Goal 6 and Goal 13, which deal with climate action and green energy. This means that Nigeria has a moral duty to fulfill its obligations under all these treaties and the attainment of the SDGs. How then can Nigeria do it? Tax policies and ESG standards are veritable instruments to enable Nigeria to meet its duty under these treaties and attainment of SDGs. Let's begin with tax policies. Tax policies can work in helping Nigeria to promote environmental sustainability through carbon pricing. Carbon pricing includes green taxes and carbon taxes. Green taxes is basically the granting of tax incentives to companies that invest in green energy, energy-efficient technologies, and sustainable agricultural practices. It could be through tax holidays, it could be through investment allowances. Then we have carbon taxation. Carbon taxation basically is the attachment of consumption, to switch to cleaner fuels, to invest in carbon reducing technologies, and also to develop low carbon goods and services. Next slide, please. We have looked at tax policies. Let us look at the second aspect, ESG standards. Now, how can ESG standards enable Nigeria to meet with its obligations under the various international treaties and to attain the SDG goals? The first is through environmental impact assessment. This means that companies should be mandated to carry out an assessment before every major project. They have to sit and reflect. Is this going to impact the environment positively or negatively? Is this project going to deplete wildlife? Is it going to lead to deforestation? Is it going to pollute the water that the poor members in the community are managing? Is it going to cause toxins to be released in the soil and plants cannot grow? This is what environmental impact assessment means. The next is ESG reporting requirements. Every year, companies submit their annual financial reports. In addition, why don't we compel them to submit an ESG report? Are they meeting the minimum ESG requirements? Thirdly is, sorry please, the last slide. Environmental standards and certification. Companies who have met environmental standards should be given a certificate. Investors, foreign investors should be discouraged from investing in companies that don't have that certificate, because that certificate is proof that they have met with ESG standards. Then we have public-private partnerships. Members of the public institutions and private institutions can come together and collaborate to look for incentives and to look for initiatives that can solve problems like deforestation, pollution control, waste management, sustainable urban planning. And lastly, we have capacity building and education. This is focused on training, raising awareness, and educating people on the need to integrate ESG concerns in decision-making progress. Next slide, please. Now, let us look at the international community. What is the standards being set by the international community? It's important to do this because I mentioned a list of treaties earlier. Nigeria is not the only country that subscribes to those treaties. Other countries also signed those treaties. So if it's not only us that are concerned about environmental sustainability, what are others doing and how can we learn from them? If you're in Nigeria and there's something that you must have had at one point or the other, Kola, look at your mate. He's doing this or that. Amina, look at what your mates are doing. Do they have two heads? So let's look at what our mates are doing when it comes to promoting environmental sustainability. We'll start with Africa. Let's look at Ghana. Previous slide, please. Let's look at Ghana. In early this year, February 2024, Ghana introduced carbon taxation. Another African country to do that is South Africa. We also have Mauritius that introduced carbon taxation. This is a picture of Ghana with two heads, but I have to tell you confidently, I've seen some Ghanaians, and trust me, they don't have two heads. So we can do what they are doing. Next slide, please. Other African countries may not have explicit carbon taxation, but they have what can be called implicit carbon taxation through fuel excise taxes. We have Uganda doing that, Kenya doing that, Ethiopia, Morocco, and Rwanda, and it's covering a significant percentage of their carbon emissions. Next slide, please. Looking at other countries, I'll call them our seniors. There are countries more developed than Nigeria. We have a list of them: Italy, Iceland, Germany, Japan, South Korea, the United States, United Kingdom, and so many of them. And carbon taxation is working out well for them, especially for countries like Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, and the rest. It must be emphasized, though, that tax policies, the result differs in each country, and it depends on so many factors. For example, the taxation rate. Are the taxes high? Are they low? Then other climate policies are also involved. Then what the revenue is being used for. I should also emphasize that Nigeria should not emulate these countries blindly. We have to reckon with peculiar Nigeria situation. Nigeria is not 100% similar with all these countries. So we reckon with those differences and modify the policies and standards accordingly. Next slide, please. There are some potential challenges to promoting environmental sustainability through tax policies and ESG standards. The first is implementation and enforcement. What's the use of having laws, policies, and standards if there's going to be weak enforcement? It's practically useless. The second is ESG standards could potentially burden small and medium-sized enterprises. It's no mean feat to suddenly switch from maybe fossil fuel energy to renewable energy like solar and the rest. For small and medium-sized enterprises, the burden can be much on them. So this is another challenge. The next is availability of accurate and reliable data. If there is no accurate or reliable database, we will not even be able to keep track of carbon emissions. We cannot keep track of whether companies are adhering to the standards and policies. The next is capacity building. Please, the previous slide. Training and raising awareness is also going to cost some money. And the last is tax policies and ESG standards could affect vulnerable communities. For example, rural areas, businesses in rural areas might not be able to meet up with some of these standards at the same pace that businesses in urban areas would. Can I have the next slide? These are some of the solutions and recommendations. If you strengthen regulatory framework, there can be implementation and enforcement. It could also encourage and foster public-private collaborations. Two heads are better than one, not like the Ghana head we saw, of course. Figurative head from the public sector and the private sector. Then promoting education, facilitation of access to finance for SMEs, and ensuring that environmental policies reckon with social equity and inclusion. I'll be handing over to my partner for the conclusion.
Dennis Rivers, while commenting on the on the topic sustainability, environmental sustainability, he said that we don't have to. Please, the next slide. He said, we don't have to sacrifice a strong economy for a healthy environment. And it is true. Indeed, we don't have to sacrifice our economy for a healthy environment. We can have both. We can have a healthy environment and a good economic growth. We can, through the tax policies, implementing tax policies and ESG standards, we can have both strong economy and a healthy environment. Thank you.
A round of applause for our speaker. Thank you very much. Please hold on for questions from the judges.
Well done. Timbi, well done. Well done. That was a good presentation. So you mentioned something carbon tax when you were doing your presentation, okay? And are you aware that companies have ways of avoiding taxes? Hope you are aware. So how can this carbon tax implementation comes in here so to avoid companies that avoid paying taxes now? I don't even understand my question. Please, how can this implementation come so all these companies that have their ways of avoiding taxes so they want to avoid these carbon taxes? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, sir. As part of the recommendations and solutions that we mentioned earlier, we said we are going to need a very strong regulatory framework. We could have an independent agency or an independent branch of the FIRS specifically for carbon taxation to ensure that companies are not invading these taxes or that there is no tax fraud involved. Then the issue of capacity building and stakeholders meeting between the public, if companies can understand the long-term benefits of paying these taxes, and if there are also penalties, stringent penalties that are enforced on people who avoid these taxes. And this is where the judiciary comes in. If companies are taken to court and stringent penalties, both monetary and otherwise, are imposed on them, if companies are taken to court, the penalty, the full penalty is imposed on them. the regulatory framework, that is the enforcement part, perhaps a branch of the FIRS or an independent regulatory body is going to handle it, audit it, and check to make sure that companies are not evading it. And those who do are going to be used as a case study for others to learn from.
Okay, well done. Please, I want you to expatiate on how you think financing for SMEs would help in the ESG and, financing the move from fossil fuels to renewable energy, because I'm trying to understand.
Okay, many SMEs are already using brown energy, and some of these clean energy technologies are not easily available to them. They may have to shut down their business if the government makes it mandatory. Maybe there is a set time that is in solar or wind powered or hydroelectric, and they cannot meet up. For big companies, it might be possible, but small businesses that are just upcoming, maybe a business that is just starting off in a rural area, has not gotten a lot of patronage, may not be able to meet up with it. But if there is going to be maybe grants or loans from the government, then they can meet up with others.
Once again, a round of applause for Team B as they come off stage. Right now, I would like to call on Team F. Team F, please. Can you proceed to the stage? The timekeeper, are you ready for us? Remember, you have 10 minutes and an additional 1 minute. Then you get questions from the judges. Timekeeper, at the count of 3. 1, 2, ready.
Good afternoon. All protocols duly observed. My name is Favor Ejaita Boyode, and with me is... Together, we are going to speak on blueprints for leveraging tax policies and ESG standards for environmental sustainability in Nigeria. Now, climate change is no longer a hoax. It's not a theoretical concept. It's a pressing issue that poses significant threats to our environment, and therefore needs the collaborative efforts of both governments and corporate entities. Now, ESG standards, on the other hand, are criteria companies use to assess and report on their environmental impact and also to ensure their corporate accountability. And our investors make use of these ESG standards to make informed decisions on the carbon footprint and environmental impact of each of these companies. Now although Nigeria does not have an ESG based specific legislation, there are however similar rules, regulations, policies, and codes inherent to our laws. Take, for instance, Section 305, Sub 3 of CAMA places an environmental obligation on companies, and the entirety of Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution provides for the substratum of ESG standards, environmental, social, and governance. Now, how do we leverage tax policies and ESG standards? Now, we can do this by exploring the synergy between tax policies and ESG standards. Now, shortly after COP26 in 2021, the Nigerian government enacted the Climate Act. The National Council on Climate Change, the NCCC, was established. Now, it also had in that act, was between the NCCC and the FRS, to come up with a tax mechanism. And shortly after, the federal government came up with the carbon tax policy and carbon tax and credit policy. Now, this carbon taxation is a clear example of a synergy between ESG standards and tax policies, using taxation as a compliance metric, as a compliance tool, to ensure that companies are keeping to their ESG requirements and monitoring their environmental impacts and carbon footprint. Now,
having discussed the possibility of a synergy between tax and ESG, we wonder what the challenges are for this, and we present the challenges in 2 facets: policy challenges and administrative challenges. Now, one, policy challenges, the first is its impact on the economy. We do admit the fact that the producers and Nigeria itself are heavily dependent on fossil fuel. So trying to impose this is going to raise the challenge of price of goods and services increasing. The second is the incentive framework. We will admit that the scattered and inadequate legislative framework for incentives will make it challenging again to determine the incentives and how it will be structured to administer the tax framework. The second facet, the administrative challenges. The first one is that Nigeria already has issues administering its tax framework, which leads us to the next issue, administering a carbon tax policy. Since Nigeria already has a difficulty administering its already established tax framework, another challenge that could arise is it trying to administer the carbon tax framework. I would let my partner highlight the solutions to these challenges.
In order to tackle these challenges, we propose a three-pronged solution approach, which we refer to as LAPAS, legal, policy, and administrative solutions. Now, onto the legal solutions. Now, we propose the enactment of a carbon taxation legislation. Now, the reason for this is that taxation is usually based on enacted laws that are enacted by the National Assembly. You cannot impose taxation without an enacted law, and this is why we propose, first and foremost, a carbon tax law that will set a limit on greenhouse gas emissions and ensure, and also default. Now, onto the next solution, which is the policy solution. Now, the first, we have three-pronged approach in our policy solution. The first is the promotion of green bonds. Now, we know that green bonds are a debt instrument that are used to finance projects. Now, finance projects with environmental impact. Now, when a company or the government issue out green bonds, they could have tax-exempt financing attached to it. Now, this will enable companies to key into the idea of the issuance of green bonds because of the tax-exempt financing. We all know that when bonds are issued, they are taxed on it. But if tax-exempt financing is keyed upon green bonds, it will help further on environmental impacts and climate change efforts. Now, the next is resisting tax incentives and exemptions. Now, by government offering more tax incentives and exemptions, there is a likelihood that there's going to be a brunt on the poor masses and the brunt on the economy. So we propose that there be a revisit of our entire tax incentive and exemption structures in order to cater for the leakage in the tax revenue. And the third strategy on our policy solution is enhanced taxpayer education, collaboration between governments, between institutions, relevant tax agencies. A good example for that is this Tax 180 Summit. We say a big shout out to the organizers and to the sponsors. Now, the next solution is the administrative solution. Now, we have two strategies here. One first is developing a compliance improvement program. Now, the essence of this is that the FRS will develop this compliance improvement program that is focused on enforcement measures on non-compliant taxpayers. Enforcement measures so that we could actually check out those people who have exceeded the greenhouse gas emissions and go after defaulters. And it could also contain key compliance activities such as filing, payment, and reporting requirements. The second strategy under this solution is strengthening interagency coordination and data sharing. Now, there could be a collaboration between the relevant tax agencies and the relevant tax agencies in the energy sector. These agencies could combine together to monitor enforcement. They come together to monitor enforcement and to ensure strict compliance with regulations and requirements.
Now, while proposing solutions is applaudable, it may not be tenable without a mission model, and this is why we are going to be different and present how we plan to achieve and execute our goals. Now, this will involve next slide please, many stakeholders, including the government, the taxpayers, international organizations, as seen here. Now, how do we intend to achieve this? First, by ensuring that we keep up with legislation, such as a carbon tax framework. Second, by engaging in public awareness campaigns to ensure that citizens are aware of the need for tax paying and the government keeps up with tax administration. Third, that we ensure that we constantly conduct research on emerging policy issues, not only to establish where we fall short, but to establish how far we have gone. Special shout out to the Tax Reforms and Fiscal Policy Committee headed by Mr. Taiwo for doing this. Number 4 involves embracing and harnessing technology for a more innovative and effective framework. Now, there are metrics we set for this. The first one is tax revenue growth. We measure tax revenue growth as indicators of how we have improved the system. The second one is measuring the tax compliance rates. This measuring it helps us assess more areas for development and the impact of the programs which we've conducted. And thirdly and finally, taxpayer satisfaction. By using feedback mechanisms such as surveys and interviews, wherever this policy we've implemented goes and if it is favorable and how it can be improved. Now, the outcomes we are looking for are, although 5, there are 3 main outcomes. First, battling climate change, which brings us to numbers 4 and 5 as a subsequent outcome of it. Now, this involves encouraging companies that engage in research or the use of green energy through incentives and exceptions. The second aspect is taxing companies that emit carbon. This is the carbon tax framework and implementing them. The second one, revenue generation. This is by generating revenue through the taxes. That is what we are looking for. And then finally, investor confidence. Investors recently have been leaving Nigeria, not only because of how Nigeria is structured, but its tax system. Now, when we show that our tax systems comply with ESG standards and we make it favorable and reasonable for these investors, they are likely to be more willing to invest in Nigeria. And not only does this increase job employment, it also boosts our economy. Thank you.
Finally, why do we win this competition? We are the only team in this competition that has provided you with an actual blueprint, provided you with a mission model on how to get our goals. Now, providing recommendations without telling you how we want to achieve this is at best an academic exercise and at worst shallow. And we have provided that mission model for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Round of applause for Team F. So please hold on while we get questions for the judges.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Team F, I suppose, right? Okay, I think I have a few questions for you. The first one is this. You talked about enactment of carbon tax law, right? And I'm aware that we currently have Climate Change Act. In your view, do you think legislating carbon tax law will be necessary, or to review the existing Climate Change Act?
Okay. In my view, it will be best to establish the carbon tax framework. Why? Because if you observe the Climate Change Act, it repeats the same thing, the carbon budget, and it does not specify how the carbon budget should be attained. Now, the best thing to do is enable a framework. We do know that there's the criminal code, but there's also the VAP Act, stealing offenses. These are focused on specific acts to ensure their enforcement. Now, creating a carbon tax framework, a carbon tax legislation that is focused not only on carbon budget, but on carbon tax and how it should be enforced, the percentages for the companies, will ensure that administration will not continuously be a problem for the Nigerian government.
Thank you. So my next question is this. Well, I also believe that carbon tax, climate change, environmental sustainability is a specialized area. Hence, there's need to have experts around that field. So what will you advise the relevant tax authority? Would you say they should start developing experts around that? Because if you're advising that there should be a carbon tax law, and which seems to be like a specialized area, would you advise that the relevant tax authority should start developing experts around that line? Or you think it's what the existing personnel can handle?
There's always a need to improve. Now, we feel that there might be experts within the various agencies, including the FRAS, to that capacity. But we think also that due to the novel approach in Nigeria, then we need to develop more expertise and more manpower in this aspect. During our presentation, we'll talk about interagency collaboration and data sharing. Now, this scheme is also an avenue where both agencies like that from the energy sector and the FRS can come together and train persons and personnel on this in order to make sure that we are doing the right and the correct thing in international best practices.
Last question. should our focus, since we are talking about climate change, environmental sustainability, emission reduction target, should our focus be on tax revenue growth or addressing climate change challenges? Because when we introduce carbon tax, I think we have an objective. The objective is, well, I want you to explain. The objective to grow revenue, or the objective is to address that environmental issues cropping up from emission?
Okay, thank you. There is no one objective. It is to create a balance. The carbon tax framework does two things. It's in two prongs, as explained. So while it's collecting tax from those generating tax, it's also reducing carbon emissions and encouraging greener energy. How does it do this? It encourages companies that use greener energy and then deters companies from emitting tax. It taxes them on their greenhouse gas emissions. So it doesn't just focus on tax revenue or greener energy, it balances the both. Thanks, sir.
Well done. I just have one question. What are your recommendations for preventing greenwashing? Because one of your policy recommendations, issuing green bonds, and when you issue green bonds, you obviously have to show the impacts that you have in, preventing, in promoting, renewable energy, and most companies, especially when they have to issue green bonds, they tend to, cap, right? Which is called in the term greenwashing. So, what are the recommendations that you would say to, prevent companies from capping when they have to, go to the market to issue
okay,
green bonds?
when we talked about green bonds, we talked about that green bonds are used to finance green energy projects, right? So we have the FRS there, and then we have what we want to talk about interagency collaboration and data sharing. So all of these agencies come together to ensure that, we all know that if a company comes out today and says, okay, these are tax liability for the year, the FRS has the power to say, oh no, we don't think that is it. We think this is what it is. So the FRS and other agencies are also there to make sure that these companies are actually doing what they say they do. Is that clear?
A round of applause for Team F once again. Well done to all teams that have presented here today. I'd like to tell everyone that at Tax 180 today, we're not just going to be focusing on tax policies and ESG standards and how they can promote environmental sustainability. We're not just going to also be having a climate change challenge, but interestingly, we are going to be launching a journal, a maiden journal by the Tax Club of Obafemi Awolowo University, and it's titled Tax Digest Journal. Our distinguished guest would be launching the journal, and I would like to invite Eunice Olaleye to read the citation of our guest. All right. So worthy of note also that the editor-in-chief for the Tax Digest Journal is our very own, a lecturer at the Faculty of Law of Obafemi Awolowo University, in person of Dr. Mrs. Oluwadamilola Adejumo. I think it's right that we put our hands together for her. Ma, she was really instrumental in the success of this journal. So I yield the floor to Eunice Olaleye to read the citation of our distinguished guest who will be launching the journal on behalf of the Tax Club of Obafemi Awolowo University.
Thank you. Standing on existing protocols, I would like to crave your indulgence that we rise while the citation of Professor Teju Shumori is being read. I'd like us to stand, please. All right, pardon me. Standing on existing protocols, I'd like to ask Professor Tejusho Morin to please stand while our citation is being read. Thank you, Ma. A round of applause, please. All right. Tejusho Morin, popularly known as Teju Tax, is the first and only female professor of taxation in Nigeria. She is privileged to have headed 3 notable tax professional bodies as President, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, the first female president, West African Union of Tax Institutes, and led Association of African Tax Institutes. Teju, the first female dean of the College of Postgraduate Studies, is of the College of Arts, Social and Management Science, and a member of the Governing Council of Caleb University. Shumori has in-depth experience in Nigerian tax system, spanning over 45 years, having worked in the Federal Inland Revenue Service for 34 years. And retired as the first female coordinating director. In 1982, she became the first Nigerian to obtain MTax degree, and in 1989, she came third for her essay in a tax competition of the Commonwealth Association of Tax Administrators. She's a life member, European Institute of Financial Directors, and a member of the Global Tax Advisors Platform. In 2019, Teju was appointed as the only female member of Tax Advisory Committee, consistently participating to make amendments to Nigerian tax laws, thus blending academics with professionalism. As a prolific writer, she has 151 publications in taxation, singly authored in addition to Teju Tax, reference book on the Nigerian tax system, general accounting and taxation terms, a well sought after tax encyclopedia. In 2018, she became a fiscal commissioner and eventually a co-chair of the Fiscal Policy Roundtable of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG, in 2020. One of Shumori's 45 awards is the Nkrumah Africa Leadership as Africa's most outstanding tax administrator. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, join me as I make welcome Tejusho Morin with a round of applause, please. Thank you.
Please, let's continue to give her a big round of applause as she comes up stage. Worthy of note is that she's the first and only female professor of taxation in Nigeria. So it's a big honor that we have her amongst us at Tax180 to the summit. So please, let's continue to put our hands together for her. And joining now to launch the journal would be the president of the Tax Club of Obafemi Awolowo University, a friend and brother, Clinton Oladayo Alabi.